Tonight, facing an historic defeat by the Congress, President Trump is breaking the glass and pulling the fire alarm. The president will sign a border security bill that gives him but a fraction of what he wants for his wall. But to get the billions more he wants, the president plans to declare that a national emergency exists on the southern border. The House will vote on the bill to keep the government open later tonight. The Senate passed it this afternoon by a vote of 83-16. But before a single vote was cast, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell broke the news of the president's plans.
I've just had an opportunity to speak with President Trump, and he, I would say to all my colleagues, has indicated he's prepared to sign the bill. He will also be issuing a national emergency declaration at the same time. And I've indicated to him that I'm going to support the national emergency declaration.
Well, the bill to keep the government open provides $1.4 billion for 55 miles of new fencing, well short of the $5.7 billion the president wants. According to Reuters, a source familiar with the plan said that to get more money for the wall, quote, the White House had identified $2.7 billion in funds previously appropriated by Congress that could be redirected to barrier funding as part of a national emergency. In a joint statement, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer responded, quote, declaring a national emergency would be a lawless act, a gross abuse of the power of the presidency, and a desperate attempt to distract from the fact that President Trump broke his core promise to have Mexico pay for his wall. The Congress will defend our constitutional authorities. Well, it's not just Democrats objecting to Trump's declaration of a national emergency. In recent weeks, members of the president's own party have warned of the consequences.
I don't think he should do that. I think it's a bad precedent.
We got to be very careful about endorsing broad uses of executive power.
This would just be another erosion of congressional authority in this particular area.
The real concern that I have is the precedent that this then sets.
I think that's dubious from a constitutional perspective, and I hope that the president will not go that route.
Wow. I'm joined right now by Joy Reid, host of AM Joy and MSNBC. Jonathan Swan, national political reporter for Axios. Charlie Sykes, editor-in-chief of The Bulwark. And Paul Butler is a former federal prosecutor. Joy, I'm going to you first. What do you hear when he's breaking the glass? He's going national emergency. He's shooting the moon. He says, I can't get what I want from Congress. They're the appropriators. They control the purse strings. The hell with them. I'm declaring a national emergency. I'm going to go steal the money from forest fires or wherever I can find it. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, as soon as I heard about this, just as a lot of us did, jumped on the phone with Republican sources. And what I'm hearing back, Chris, is that it's pretty straightforward. The people that Donald Trump fears will take away support from him if he gets in a jam, people like Ann Coulter, people like Lou Dobbs, even Sean Hannity, had already gone out publicly and said that the deal that he is going to sign, and he was always going to sign, because they were definitely not going to shut the government down again, that it's not enough and that what he'd done was not good enough. And so what you now have is a president who fears looking weak. He fears being attacked by the Ann Coulters and the Lou Dobbs of the world. And so he's decided to make a demonstration of his fealty to his promise to build a wall across the southern border. He's going to go all out because he feels that he has to.
Let me be cruel here. Ann Coulter is a firebrand. She knows how to make noise. She has guys, I think, walking around Wall Street carrying her books like machine guns. They're thrilled to be reading that stuff. But she doesn't even have a job. Why is she so scary? I mean, she's not on the air. She can't reach millions of people when she wants to. How's the mere thought of her tweeting something scare the bejesus out of this president of the United States? Because that seems to be, he was calming down Hannity. He was calming down Laura Ingraham, working a little bit with Dobbs.
Yeah.
Is he afraid mostly of Ann Coulter? Is that what it's come to? The president of the United States being led around by somebody who sells books, basically.
And Chris, he has Bill Shine working in the White House. He has the former executive producer of Hannity's show, good friend with Sean Hannity, and somebody who ran Fox News, literally working for him. So it's pretty extraordinary that a president who can tell his base we're already building a wall and get them to switch their chants from build the wall to finish the wall and get them to buy into that doesn't feel in his own, he doesn't have a sense of his own strength that he feels that he doesn't feel he can defy this media crowd. He just thinks he has to show them that he's doing the most.
Okay, Charlie, tomorrow morning people will pick up the paper. I know I'm old school about that. They're going to read headline, President declares national emergency by midnight probably tonight because Ann Coulter rang the bell. He broke the glass.
Well, look, this is a president who is terrified of angering his base. And I think he is concerned. I can imagine him being on the phone with Lou Dobbs, and Sean Hannity and telling him, okay, I have to do this, but I will do this other thing. Look, Republicans were this close to getting out of it. This is a worst-case nightmare scenario for them. This is reckless. It is dangerous. It is counterproductive. This sets a damaging precedent. Conservatives should know this. I think a lot of them understand what could happen with a Democratic president who could do this on climate change, who could do this on guns, who could do this on health care. It is a constitutional disaster, and it really changes the political dynamic going forward. So think about what the president did. Because he's afraid of losing this news cycle to hacks like Sean Hannity and Lou Dobbs and Ann Coulter. He has set a precedent that will haunt the Republican Party for decades, if not for generations.
Well, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Jerry Nadler of New York, said in a statement, I will fully support the enactment of a joint resolution to terminate the president's emergency declaration and intend to pursue all other available legal options. The Judiciary Committee will also use its authority to hold the administration to account and determine the supposed legal basis for the president's actions. Jonathan, the news here. Tell me the steps that led the president to say, I'm going to ring the bell, a national emergency like we're fighting missiles in Cuba or something. What?
Well, so I think what people need to understand is just how long this has been in the works. Last summer, Trump said to Mick Mulvaney, who was then his budget director, I need you to find me money for this wall. He could already see, and they could already see, that they weren't going to get what they wanted through Congress. Now,
so not from the Mexicans and not from the Congress. So he goes to Mick Mulvaney to embezzle some money for him.
So OMB staff have been sifting through obscure pots of money for more than 6 months now. And it's important to understand how they're thinking about it. They have a spectrum. There's easy money at this end, and there's really hard money at this end, which is politically and legally fraught. There's not that much easy money.
Mm-hmm. Well, 2.7, but we're hearing 2.7. Right. Well, that's a lot of
But
wall.
Trump's talking about $23 billion, Chris. That's the number Trump talks about, $23 billion.
Where does he find that?
Well, exactly.
Well,
exactly.
If it comes from the military, he's going to have a public relations problem.
Okay, Paul, we've got this thing we were taught in maybe by 9th grade, but checks and balances. Right. The Congress controls the purse strings. It's an old-time thing, purse strings. But they control where the money comes from and where it goes. Are they going to lay down on this?
No. Chris, there's so many legal issues here. This is like a jobs program for constitutional lawyers. First of all, is there actually a national emergency? Emergency sounds like an unforeseen crisis, as you say. This has been something that we've known about for years. And in fact, in the last 10 years, undocumented border crossings have gone down. Right. But the main issue is, where does the money come from? So when the president declares a national emergency, he unleashes all of these other laws that Congress has provided. The president can have this power if there's some crisis. But the money has to be tied to one of the specific laws. So it's not clear which of those emergency powers correlates to giving the president the right to take money that Congress has allocated to the military and use that to build a wall.
Well, let me go back to the politics, Joy. The Democrats are not going to like this. We heard from Jerry Nadler up in New York, where you are. I assume from center over to the left of the Democratic Party is not going to like it. Are the Republicans going to show some bone here, basically, and stop this, some spine?
No, because, Mitch McConnell has the same imperatives as Donald Trump. He's up for re-election in 2020. He can see Matt Bevin in his rearview mirror. If Bevin, who's now won statewide in Kentucky, decides to give himself an upgrade like Rick Scott did in Florida, he's got a problem. And so they've all got to go along with this. I can't imagine that inside of their Republican hearts, they really believe this is a good idea. No. Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, got up today.
With limited government.
At all. Nancy Pelosi got up today and she said, go ahead and do it. Because a president with different values, as she said, might believe climate change or gun violence is a national emergency. You have now opened the door. Look, the reality is, Chris, Harry Truman tried to declare national emergency and seize a steel mill. And he was told no by the courts. And there was a war going on. That was during the Korean War. It's not as if presidents can even get away with it in that situation. And that's even before the National Emergencies Act.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.